You know, I can describe the 1950s and 60s American automotive scene pretty well by simply saying it was wild. That might sound like an understatement, but when was the last time you saw a car with three wheels, atomic-powered engines, or glass bubbles for roofs rolling down the street? These weren't just cars. They were dreams made of chrome and steel, visions of tomorrow that automakers thought we'd all be driving by now. Ford Nucleon, 1958. Let me paint you a picture of what Ford engineers were thinking in 1958. The atomic age was in full swing, nuclear power was going to solve everything, and some brilliant mind at Ford said, you know what? Let's put a nuclear reactor in a car. Enter the Ford Nucleon. And yes, you heard that right, a nuclear-powered automobile. The Nucleon wasn't just ambitious, it was absolutely insane. Ford envisioned a car that would run for 5,000 miles on a single uranium pellet. No gas stations, no oil changes, just pure atomic energy propelling you down the highway. The design looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie, with a sleek, low profile and that unmistakable atomic age aesthetic. Here's where it gets interesting. Ford actually built a scale model. They had engineers working on the real thing, trying to figure out how to miniaturize a nuclear reactor enough to fit in a car. Can you imagine the safety meetings? So, what happens if someone rear-ends the nuclear car? Well, Bob, we're still working on that part. The styling was pure 1950s futurism, long, low, and sleek with fins that screamed atomic age. The reactor would have been mounted in the rear, with lead shielding to protect passengers. Because apparently, a little radiation exposure was considered an acceptable trade-off for never having to stop for gas again. Of course, the Nucleon never made it to production. By the late 1950s, people started realizing that maybe, just maybe, putting nuclear reactors in family cars wasn't the brightest idea. But for a brief moment, Ford genuinely believed they were building the future of transportation. It was automotive optimism at its most gloriously naive. General Motors Firebird, 1953. If you thought the nuclear car was wild, wait until you hear about GM's plan to put a jet engine in a car. The Firebird. I wasn't just ahead of its time, it was from another planet entirely. This wasn't some designer's fever dream. This was a real, working prototype that actually drove. Picture this. It's 1953, and GM's brightest minds are sitting around thinking, jets are fast, cars should be fast, so let's put a jet engine in a car. The result was the Firebird I, a single-seat vehicle that looked more like a fighter jet than anything you'd drive to the grocery store. And it had a genuine Whirlwind turbojet engine borrowed from military aircraft. The design was absolutely stunning in its impracticality. The driver sat in what was essentially a fighter jet cockpit, complete with a bubble canopy that hinged forward. The body was made of fiberglass and painted in that distinctive GM yellow that screamed, "Look at me, I'm from the future." The whole thing sat incredibly low to the ground, with stabilizing fins that made it look like it was about to take flight. But here's the kicker. It actually worked. GM tested this thing on proving grounds, and it could hit speeds that would make your modern sports car weep. The jet engine produced an ungodly amount of power, though it also produced an ungodly amount of noise, heat, and fuel consumption. We're talking about a car that got measured in gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. The Firebird. I was pure spectacle, a rolling advertisement for GM's technological prowess. It toured auto shows across the country, drawing crowds of amazed spectators who genuinely thought this might be what they'd be driving in the year 2000. It was automotive theater at its finest, and GM knew it. Chrysler Turbine Car, 1963. Now, if GM could put a jet engine in a car, Chrysler figured they could do it better. Enter the Chrysler Turbine Car, and this wasn't just a one-off showpiece. Chrysler actually built 55 of these things and gave them to regular families to drive around for 2 years. Can you imagine being selected for that program? The turbine car was Chrysler's answer to the fuel efficiency problems of the early 1960s. Instead of pistons and cylinders, this beauty used a gas turbine engine that could run on almost any combustible liquid: diesel, kerosene, tequila, perfume. If it burned, this car would run on it. Chrysler engineers demonstrated this by running one on Chanel No. 5, because apparently that's what passed for a marketing stunt in 1963. Gia in Italy designed the body, and it was absolutely gorgeous. Clean, elegant lines with just enough futuristic flair to let you know this wasn't your neighbor's Impala. The interior was luxurious, with a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a spacecraft. The turbine engine was whisper quiet, so quiet that Chrysler had to add artificial engine noise so pedestrians would know a car was coming. The performance was impressive too. The turbine engine produced instant torque, giving the car acceleration that surprised even Chrysler engineers. No transmission was needed because turbines don't stall at low speeds. You just pushed the accelerator and went, smooth as silk. But here's where reality crashed the party. The turbine engine was expensive to build, complex to service, and had a thirst for fuel that would make a Cadillac Elorado look economical. After the 2-year test program ended, most of the cars were destroyed. Only 9 survive today, scattered in museums as reminders of what might have been. Ford Gyne, 1961. You know what cars in the 1960s needed? Fewer wheels. At least that's what Ford was thinking when they created the Gyne, a 2-wheeled car that stayed upright using gyroscopic stabilization. Because apparently, Ford engineers looked at motorcycles and thought, what if we made that more complicated? The Gyne was Ford's vision of urban transportation in the year 2000. 2 wheels, a glass bubble cockpit, and a gyroscope to keep it all balanced. The design was pure space age. Think of a cross between a motorcycle and a UFO, and you're getting close. The body was sleek and aerodynamic with that distinctive Ford styling that screamed future. Here's where it gets really interesting. The thing actually worked. Ford built a functioning prototype that could balance itself using gyroscopic stabilization. At low speeds, 2 small outrigger wheels would deploy for stability. But once you got moving, the gyroscope took over. It was like riding a motorcycle, but with a roof and air conditioning. The interior was designed for 2 passengers sitting tandem, with the driver in front and a passenger behind. The dashboard was pure 1960s futurism, with toggle switches and gauges that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. The steering was done with a single joystick, because apparently steering wheels were too 20th century. Ford genuinely believed this was the future of city driving, smaller, more maneuverable, and able to park in spaces that conventional cars couldn't dream of fitting into. They envisioned fleets of Gynes zipping through crowded urban streets, solving traffic problems through sheer efficiency. Of course, it never made it to production. The complexity of the gyroscopic system, the cost of manufacturing, and the simple fact that most people weren't ready to trust their lives to a balancing car killed the project. But for a brief moment, Ford thought they had reinvented the wheel by using fewer of them. Cadillac Cyclone, 1959. If you wanted to see what Cadillac thought driving in the space age would look like, the Cyclone was your answer. This wasn't just a car. It was a rolling laboratory of every futuristic technology Cadillac could imagine, wrapped in a body that looked like it could break the sound barrier while parked. The Cyclone was Cadillac's answer to the question nobody was asking. What if we took a luxury car and made it look like a fighter jet? The result was spectacular. 2 seats, a bubble canopy, and a nose cone that housed radar equipment for collision avoidance. Yes, you heard that right. Radar in a 1959 car. The design was pure Harley Earl, the legendary GM designer who believed cars should be rolling sculptures. The Cyclone was long, low, and loaded with fins that made it look like it was ready for takeoff. The body was hand-formed aluminum, polished to a mirror finish that would blind oncoming traffic on a sunny day. But the real innovation was in the technology. That nose-mounted radar system could detect objects ahead and warn the driver of potential collisions. The doors were electrically operated and slid forward to open, like something out of a science fiction movie. The interior was a masterpiece of space-age design, with aircraft-inspired instrumentation and controls that looked like they belonged in a rocket ship. The Cyclone also featured an early version of what we'd now call a heads-up display, projecting information onto the windshield so the driver didn't have to look down at the instruments. In 1959, this was technology that NASA would have been jealous of. Cadillac never intended to build the Cyclone for production. It was a pure show car, designed to demonstrate Cadillac's technological capabilities and vision for the future. But it worked. The Cyclone drew crowds wherever it went, cementing Cadillac's reputation as the technology leader of the American auto industry. Chrysler Dart, 1956. Long before the Dart became a sensible family sedan, Chrysler used the name for something far more ambitious, a concept car that looked like it had been designed by aerospace engineers who had never seen a road. The 1956 Dart was Chrysler's vision of what sports cars would look like in the jet age. The Dart wasn't just styled to look like an aircraft. It was actually designed using aircraft principles. The body was a single-piece fiberglass shell that wrapped around a tubular space frame, much like a fighter jet fuselage. The result was a car that looked like it could take off if you hit the right switch. Gia in Italy built the body, and they outdid themselves. The Dart was impossibly low, with a profile that was more Dart than car. The front end was a study in aerodynamic efficiency, with air intakes that looked functional even if they weren't. The whole car had an aggressive, purposeful stance that made it look fast even while sitting still. The interior was pure cockpit, with gauges and controls arranged like those in a fighter plane. The seats were lightweight buckets that held you in place during what Chrysler assumed would be high-speed maneuvers. Everything was designed to make the driver feel like a pilot rather than just someone commuting to work. Under the hood was a modified Chrysler V8 that produced respectable power for its time. But the real innovation was in the car's construction. The space frame chassis was incredibly rigid, and the lightweight fiberglass body gave the Dart a power-to-weight ratio that was impressive even by modern standards. The Dart was Chrysler's statement that they understood the future of performance cars. It wasn't just about power, it was about the total package. Looks, performance, and technology all wrapped up in a design that looked like it came from tomorrow. The fact that it actually worked just made it that much more impressive. Ford's Seattleite Gyne, 1962. Ford's Seattleite V8 was their answer to the question, what would a car look like if we designed it for the World's Fair? The result was a six-wheeled, nuclear-powered concept that looked like it had rolled straight out of the Jetsons cartoon and into the 1962 Seattle World's Fair. The name alone tells you everything you need to know about Ford's ambitions. This wasn't just a car for the 21st century, it was a car for the 21st century as imagined by 1962. The design was pure space-age optimism, with a transparent bubble cockpit that gave passengers a 360-degree view of the world around them. But here's where it gets really wild. The Seattleite Gyne had 6 wheels. Not 4, not 8, but 6. Ford engineers figured that if 4 wheels were good, 6 must be better. The extra wheels were supposed to provide better stability and traction, though they also made the car look like some kind of automotive insect. The power source was supposed to be a compact nuclear reactor, because apparently Ford was still convinced that atomic power was the answer to everything. The reactor would power electric motors at each wheel, giving the car all-wheel drive and theoretically unlimited range. Of course, the whole nuclear thing never happened, but the concept was there. The interior was designed for a family of 4, with swiveling seats that could face forward for driving or backward for socializing. The dashboard was a masterpiece of space-age design, with controls that looked like they belonged on a spaceship. Everything was clean, modern, and completely impractical for actual driving. Ford genuinely believed this was what family transportation would look like in the 21st century. The Seattleite Gyne was their vision of a world where cars were more than just transportation. They were mobile living spaces for the space-age family. General Motors Firebird III, 1958. After the success of the first 2 Firebirds, GM decided to go completely overboard with the Firebird III. This wasn't just a car, it was a rolling showcase of every piece of futuristic technology GM could imagine, wrapped in a body that looked like it could achieve orbit. The Firebird III was GM's answer to the question, what if we took everything we learned from the first 2 Firebirds and then added nuclear power? The result was a 2-seat marvel that looked more like a spacecraft than anything designed for earthbound travel. The body was long, low, and loaded with fins that made it look like a rocket ship. But the real innovation was in the technology. The Firebird III featured something called cruise control. And no, not the kind you're thinking of. This was full autonomous driving, with the car following guidance signals embedded in the highway. In 1958, GM was demonstrating technology that we're still trying to perfect today. The interior was pure space-age luxury. Air conditioning that could cool the entire car in minutes, a stereo system that was decades ahead of its time, and seating that was more like spacecraft couches than car seats. The dashboard was a masterpiece of futuristic design, with controls that looked like they belonged on the Enterprise. The Firebird III also featured something called ultrasonic navigation, which was basically early GPS. The car could theoretically navigate to any destination using ultrasonic signals, though the infrastructure to support this never materialized. It was classic GM, solving problems that didn't exist yet with technology that wouldn't work for another 50 years. The performance was impressive too. The gas turbine engine produced smooth, quiet power that made the car feel like it was floating rather than driving. Combined with the car's low profile and aerodynamic design, the Firebird III was probably the closest thing to a real UFO that ever rolled on four wheels. Chrysler Norseman, Me 1956. The Chrysler Norseman was supposed to be the crown jewel of Chrysler's 1956 concept car lineup. Designed by Gia in Italy, it featured innovations that wouldn't appear in production cars for decades. The only problem? It sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean before anyone in America could see it. The Norseman was Chrysler's vision of luxury car design taken to its logical extreme. The most striking feature was its lack of a traditional roof. Instead, the car had a single, continuous curve of glass that swept from the windshield to the rear window. This wasn't just a design statement. It was a technical marvel that required completely new manufacturing techniques. Gia spared no expense in building the Norseman. The body was hand-formed aluminum, polished to a mirror finish, and painted in a deep blue that seemed to change color depending on the light. The interior was equally impressive, with custom leather seats and a dashboard that looked like something from a luxury yacht. The engineering was groundbreaking, too. The Norseman featured fully integrated air conditioning, power everything, and a sound system that was years ahead of its time. The suspension was designed to provide a ride so smooth that passengers would barely know they were in a car. But here's where the story gets tragic. The Norseman was loaded onto the Andrea Doria for shipment to America in July 1956. You know what happened next. The ship collided with another vessel and sank, taking the Norseman with it. The car that was supposed to showcase Chrysler's vision of the future instead became a permanent resident of the ocean floor. The loss of the Norseman was devastating for Chrysler. They had invested enormous amounts of money and time in the project, and suddenly it was gone. Photos and design sketches are all that remain of what many consider to be one of the most beautiful concept cars ever built. Ford La Tosca, 1955. Ford's La Tosca was their attempt to prove that American car companies could build something as elegant and sophisticated as anything coming out of Europe. The result was a concept car that looked like it had been designed by Italian masters, but built with American ambition. The La Tosca was Ford's answer to the growing influence of European sports cars in the American market. While other manufacturers were building bigger, flashier cars, Ford decided to go in the opposite direction. The La Tosca was clean, elegant, and understated, at least by 1950s American standards. The design was pure elegance. Long, low, and perfectly proportioned, with lines that flowed like water. The body was hand-formed aluminum, painted in a sophisticated silver that made other cars look gaudy by comparison. The interior was equally refined, with leather seats and wood trim that wouldn't have looked out of place in a luxury yacht. But the La Tosca wasn't just about looks. It was also about performance. Under the hood was a modified Ford V8 that had been tuned for European-style driving. The suspension was designed to provide the kind of handling that sports car enthusiasts demanded, while still maintaining the comfort that American buyers expected. The La Tosca represented Ford's belief that American car buyers were ready for something more sophisticated than the typical Detroit offering. It was a car that could hold its own against the best European sports cars, but with the reliability and serviceability that only American manufacturers could provide. Unfortunately, the La Tosca never made it to production. Ford's marketing department decided that American buyers weren't ready for something so refined, and the project was quietly shelved. It was a decision that Ford would later regret as European sports cars gained popularity throughout the 1960s. Cadillac Eldorado Bromtown Car, 1956. Cadillac's Eldorado Bromtown Car was their vision of what luxury transportation would look like in the atomic age. This wasn't just a car, it was a rolling palace that happened to have wheels, complete with enough chrome to plate a small building and luxury features that wouldn't appear in production cars for decades. The town car was Cadillac's attempt to create the ultimate expression of American luxury. The design was pure Harley Earl, with dramatic fins, acres of chrome, and proportions that made other luxury cars look modest. The body was hand-formed and painted in a deep metallic blue that seemed to glow in the sunlight. But the real innovation was in the luxury features. The town car featured air conditioning that could cool the entire car in minutes, power seats that adjusted in 8 different directions, and a stereo system that was decades ahead of its time. The interior was trimmed in the finest leather and wood, with attention to detail that rivaled anything from Europe. The engineering was equally impressive. The town car featured Cadillac's most advanced V8 engine, coupled to a transmission that was so smooth it felt like the car was floating. The suspension was designed to provide a ride that was so comfortable passengers would arrive at their destination feeling refreshed rather than tired. The town car also featured something called Twilight Sentinel, an automatic system that turned the headlights on and off based on ambient light conditions. In 1956, this was technology that seemed like science fiction, but it actually worked perfectly. Cadillac never intended to build the town car for production. It was pure show car, designed to demonstrate what was possible when cost was no object. But it worked, establishing Cadillac as the technology leader of the American luxury car market and inspiring features that would eventually appear in production cars. Chrysler Gia Streamline X, 1955. The Chrysler Gia Streamline X was what happened when Chrysler's engineers got together with Italian designers and decided to ignore everything they knew about practical car design. The result was a concept car that looked like it had been carved from a single block of aluminum and polished to perfection. The Streamline X was Chrysler's exploration of pure aerodynamic efficiency. Every line, every curve, every surface was designed to slip through the air with minimal resistance. The result was a car that looked like it was moving even when it was standing still, with a profile that was more aircraft than automobile. Gia in Italy handled the construction, and they created something that was more sculpture than car. The body was a single piece of hand-formed aluminum that wrapped around a tubular chassis like a second skin. The surface was so smooth and perfectly finished that it looked like liquid metal. The interior was equally impressive, with seats that were more like aircraft ejection seats than traditional car seats. The dashboard was a study in minimalism, with only the essential controls and gauges. Everything was designed to reduce weight and improve aerodynamics, even if it meant sacrificing some comfort. The Streamline X featured Chrysler's most advanced V8 engine, but it was the aerodynamics that made the car special. Wind tunnel testing showed that the Streamline X could achieve speeds and fuel economy that were impossible with conventional designs. It was proof that aerodynamics could be just as important as horsepower. The Streamline X was never intended for production. It was pure research designed to explore what was possible when aerodynamics took priority over everything else. But it provided valuable lessons that Chrysler would use in future production cars, proving that sometimes the most impractical concepts can lead to the most practical innovations. Ford Mystique, 1955. Ford's Mystique was their attempt to create a car that looked like it had been designed by aliens who had studied human transportation needs from a distance. The result was a concept that was so futuristic it made other space-age cars look conservative by comparison. The Mystique was Ford's exploration of what personal transportation might look like in the year 2000. The design was unlike anything that had come before. Organic curves that seemed to flow like water, combined with details that looked like they belonged on a spacecraft. The body was translucent fiberglass that seemed to glow from within. The most striking feature was the cockpit, which was completely enclosed in a transparent bubble that gave passengers a 360-degree view of the world around them. The seats were suspended within the bubble, giving the impression that occupants were floating in space. It was automotive theater at its most dramatic. The Mystique featured Ford's vision of future powertrains, electric motors powered by what they called atomic batteries. Of course, the atomic part never materialized, but the concept was there. The car was designed to be completely silent, gliding through the air like a ghost. The interior was pure space age, with controls that looked like they belonged on a spaceship, and displays that provided information in ways that seemed almost magical. Everything was designed to make the driver feel like they were piloting a craft from the future, rather than just driving a car. The Mystique was Ford's statement that they weren't just building cars for today, they were building dreams for tomorrow. It was a rolling advertisement for Ford's vision of the future, complete with technology that wouldn't exist for decades and design that still looks futuristic today. General Motors Firebird II, 1956. After the success of the jet-powered Firebird Y, GM decided to take the concept to its logical conclusion with the Firebird II. This wasn't just a car with a jet engine. It was a complete reimagining of what personal transportation could be in the atomic age. The Firebird II was GM's vision of the family car of the future. Unlike the single-seat Firebird I, this one was designed for 4 passengers, with a titanium body that looked like it could withstand re-entry from orbit. The design was pure space-age luxury, with curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal. The most impressive feature was the propulsion system. The Firebird II used the same gas turbine engine as its predecessor, but refined for family use. The engine was quieter, more efficient, and produced power that was smooth as silk. There was no transmission, just instant power delivery that made the car feel like it was floating. The interior was a masterpiece of space-age design. 4 individual seats that looked like they belonged on a spacecraft, with controls that were arranged more like an aircraft cockpit than a traditional car dashboard. The air conditioning system could cool the entire car in minutes, and the stereo system was years ahead of its time. But the real innovation was in the technology. The Firebird II featured something called guide wire steering, which allowed the car to follow embedded wires in the highway for semi-autonomous driving. In 1956, GM was demonstrating technology that we're still trying to perfect today. The Firebird II was GM's proof that they could build family cars that were just as advanced as their experimental single-seaters. It was a rolling demonstration of what was possible when the world's largest automaker decided to ignore practical limitations and build the future. Chrysler Diablo, 1957. The Chrysler Diablo was what happened when Chrysler's designers decided that conventional cars were too boring and that what the world really needed was a 4-wheeled rocket ship. The result was a concept car that looked like it had been designed for travel between planets rather than trips to the grocery store. The Diablo was Chrysler's exploration of extreme performance and futuristic design. The body was impossibly low and wide, with a profile that was more missile than car. The design was pure aggression, with air intakes that looked like they could swallow small vehicles and exhaust outlets that suggested serious business. The most striking feature was the cockpit, which was completely enclosed in a transparent canopy that hinged forward for entry. The driver sat in what was essentially a fighter jet seat, surrounded by controls that looked like they belonged in a spacecraft. It was automotive theater at its most dramatic. Under the hood was Chrysler's most powerful V8 engine, but it was the packaging that made the Diablo special. The engine was mounted low and far back, giving the car a center of gravity that was almost on the ground. The result was handling that was unlike anything that had come before. The Diablo featured advanced suspension that could adjust for different driving conditions, brakes that were borrowed from aircraft, and aerodynamics that were designed for triple-digit speeds. It was a car that was designed to perform at levels that seemed impossible in 1957. The Diablo was never intended for production. It was pure fantasy, designed to showcase what was possible when performance took priority over everything else. But it captured the imagination of a generation and established Chrysler as a company that wasn't afraid to push the boundaries of what was possible. Looking back at these 15 futuristic concept cars, I'm struck by something profound. These weren't just cars. They were dreams made of steel and glass, visions of a tomorrow that seemed inevitable in the optimistic 1950s and 60s. Sure, we never got our nuclear-powered Nucleons or our gyroscopically balanced gyrons, but these concepts shaped the automotive world in ways we're still discovering today. They remind us of an era when anything seemed possible, when automakers dared to imagine futures that were bold, ambitious, and gloriously impractical.